He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Chapter 2. Mandie leaves home. The full moon was coming up between the hills of Charlie Gap as Mandie sat on the doorstep, wrapped in the quilt from her bed. All the people had finally left, and she and her mother and Irene had gone to bed. She had listened as she lay there on her corn-shuck mattress to be sure that they were asleep, and then, cuddling Snowball, her kitten, she had climbed down the ladder from the attic room where she slept with her sister. She couldn't go to sleep. She was thinking of her past and wondering about her future without her father. She was remembering Preacher DeHart's words about God. He will punish you. What had she done wrong? Why was she being punished? A soft whistle that sounded like a bird came from the nearby trees. She rose quickly as she saw Uncle Ned coming toward her, his soft moccasins soundless. She ran to meet him, dragging the quilt and dropping Snowball. "Oh, Uncle Ned, I'm so glad you came." "I came to find story why Jim Shaw go to Happy Hunting Ground." The old man put his arm around the child as they sat down on the nearby log. "He had a bad cold, Uncle Ned, a real bad cold, and it just got worse." "Cold?" The Indian did not understand. "Yes, Mama said it was, pneumonia. He told me that he was going to heaven, and that he would wait for me there." She broke into sobs. "Don't make tears, Papoose. He wait. He always keeps promise." Uncle Ned wiped her eyes with the corner of the quilt. "When he go?" "Today is Sunday. It was the day before yesterday, Friday. Oh, why did he leave me? Why couldn't I go with him? You little Papoose now. Must be big squaw first. Big God, he say when you come." "You do what he say, remember? Jim Shaw tell us about big God. Cherokee believes him. Jim Shaw one of our people." She turned quickly to look at him. "My father? One of your people? But my father was a white man, red hair, blue eyes, and you're an Indian." "Yes, and his father look same. Your daddy never want to tell you his mama Indian squaw. Him one of our people. Him—" Mandie interrupted excitedly. "My grandmother was an Indian? Are you really my Uncle Ned?" "Jim Shaw one brother. He never come see. Jim Shaw take me for brother." "Is my grandmother still living?" "No, she go to Happy Hunting Ground when Jim Shaw little brave." "What about my grandfather? Is he living?" "I do not know. Jim Shaw never tell me when he come to see Cherokee." "My daddy used to come to see you? Where do you live, Uncle Ned?" "Over the hills, that way." He pointed toward one of the hills above the cabin. "Follow Nantahala River." "Could I come to see you sometime?" "No. Bear get Papoose. Wolf, panther, wait for Papoose to come." "But they don't get you." "I shoot with arrow." He patted his sling over his shoulder, holding his huge hazel bow and arrows with turkey feathers. "I kill." "I've never been anywhere except to school and to church. The schoolhouse is just down the road a piece, and we go in the wagon to church at Maple Springs. And all the Sunday school teacher ever says is honor thy mother and father and all that stuff. I could never remember the rest of it. Uncle Ned, do you think that God really means for us to honor our mother? Big books say that?" "Yes, that's what it says, the Bible." "Then you do what it say." "Big Shaw say we don't do what big books say, we don't get to see big God." "But my mother—" She hesitated. "I know, I see, I hear. She bad squaw." The girl smiled at his description. "Even if she's bad, do I still have to honor her?" "Books say that?" "The Bible doesn't say whether your mother has to be good or bad. It just says to honor thy mother." "Then close ears, eyes. Honor thy mother." Uncle Ned stood up. "Papoose, go to sleep now. I come again. Soon. Go now." Mandie scrambled to her feet and picked up Snowball, who was rubbing around her feet. She would go back to bed, but how she could ever have other things to think about. She was part Cherokee, Indian. Why had her father never told her? If she could get enough courage, she would ask her mother about it. Back in her bed, with Snowball curled up by her side, she finally fell asleep. Her mother woke her, yelling from downstairs. It was morning, but Mandie felt as though she had just closed her eyes. "Get up, Amanda. Work to be done. Amanda, you hear me?" "Yes, Mama." She sat up. Irene was still asleep. She reached over and shook her sister. "Irene, Mama's up." "Leave me alone. I'm not ready to get up yet." Irene pulled the covers over her head. Mandie quickly dressed in the early morning chill, remembering cold mornings when she was small, and her father had held her in his lap by the fireplace downstairs while he put on her shoes and stockings. She remembered her conversation with Uncle Ned. Maybe she could catch her mother in the right mood if she hurried. She could ask some questions about what Uncle Ned had told her. But when she reached the last rung on the ladder, her mother was waiting for her with the milk bucket. "Go milk Susie while I start breakfast. Get a move on." Etta Shaw scowled. Without a word, Mandie took the bucket, set Snowball down as she went outside, and raced with the kitten to the barn. She didn't mind Susie at all. Susie was her friend. She always stood still and made mooing sounds while Mandie milked her. But when her mother tried it, Susie kicked up a fuss and would turn the bucket all over if she got the chance. She would also use her tail to slap Etta Shaw in the face. Only Jim and Mandie were able to handle her, and now that her father was gone, she could see the job falling entirely to her. "Good morning, Susie." She rubbed the cow's head. "You going to give me a bucket full of milk this morning? If you don't, Mama will scold me, and I want to get her in a good mood so I can find out some things." She drew up the little three-legged stool. Susie looked back at her and began her mooing, and the bucket was soon full to the brim. "Thank you, Susie. Now I'll let the bars down so you can go outside and get your breakfast. Please don't go too far away, 'cause I know I'll have to come and get you tonight." The cow moved out into the pasture. She set the milk bucket down. It was such a beautiful spring morning. Her eyes roamed over the fields, seeing her father as she remembered him, and she fell to her knees on the soft green grass. "Dear God, please take care of my daddy," she implored. "And dear God, I still love you, even if you don't love me anymore." She hurried back to the house, certain that her mother would be pleased to see so much milk, but she only took the bucket and set it on the table. "Get a move on, Amanda. School today, as usual." Going to the ladder, she called, "Irene, get up. Breakfast is ready. School today." Mandie sat down to her grits and biscuits with honey without a word. She kept staring at her father's empty place at the table. She could see it was no time to talk to her mother. Irene joined her, and then they prepared their lunch and breakfast the father had brought from Uncle Ned. They put in sausage biscuits and buttermilk in tightly closed jars, which could be warmed by the time the recess came at school. They took their sunbonnets down from the pegs at the door, tied them on, and together they began their mile-long walk down the road to the one-room schoolhouse. Even Irene was glad to get away from their mother and to enjoy the company of her classmates. There were only 16 pupils in the school and one teacher, Mr. Talent. They were divided into 4 groups of 4, one group in each corner of the big schoolroom. Mr. Talent would go from group to group giving assignments, listening to reading, and reciting arithmetic. He was not a strict schoolmaster. As long as the students made good grades, he pretended not to notice the passing of notes during the time they were reading to themselves. Mandie frequently received notes written in poetry from Joe Woodard, whose father was the only doctor in the vicinity. Joe had been her best friend from the day that she begun school, young, shy, and bewildered. Joe was only 2 years older, an experienced hand in the schoolroom. He immediately took Mandie under his wing. Irene was jealous and made life miserable for the boy. Joe passed a folded note to Mandie with an explanation that he had to return home with his mother after her father's funeral because his father, the doctor, had to make some urgent sick calls. Even though he lived a good 2 miles from the Shaws, he showed up there quite often. Etta Shaw tried her best to get him interested in Irene, but Joe had eyes only for Mandie. His note told her that he had permission to walk her home, and his father would pick him up on his way home. The two strolled along the road, ignoring Irene, who tagged by the side. Joe carried Mandie's books, and she tried to listen to his material. Her thoughts kept reverting to the fact that her father would not be home when she got there. Her father usually finished the many chores around the farm by the time school was over each day, and almost always, lately, he would be splitting logs and chopping block for the fence that he was planning to put around the property. But she knew this would take quite a while because the farm had 120 acres. The pile had steadily grown, and he'd begun hauling the rails around the boundary line a few days before he became ill. "I'm sure glad to feel the weather getting warmer," Joe remarked, throwing back his thin shoulders and taking in a deep breath. "When hot weather comes, I always feel better, for some reason." "I never thought about it," Mandie remarked. "Yeah, I suppose I like hot weather better, too, even though there are spiders and bugs and snakes crawling around. I ain't afraid of them things. I'm bigger than they are," Irene put in. "You may be bigger, but you're still not fool around with snakes," Joe told her. "That's why Daddy planted the gourds, to keep the snakes away from the house," Mandie added. "Yeah, I know," Joe said. "Here comes Snowball. It's a miracle to me how that kid knows when you're humming home." "He's smart. He always knows." Mandie stopped to pick up the kitten. "He knows when it's time to go to bed, too. He waits for me at the ladder every night." As they walked into the yard, Etta Shaw saw them coming and was waiting to give out the chores. "Change your dress, Mandie. The yard needs sweeping after all that mob of wagons and people here yesterday." She turned to Irene and said, "You can churn the milk, Irene." Mandie hurried upstairs and changed into her old faded dress and came back down to find Joe waiting with the broom in his hand. "I'll help," he told her. "You pick up the trash, papers, and things around, and I'll do the sweeping. We'll get it done in no time." "Thanks, Joe," Mandie said. The rough handmade broom always made blisters on her hands, and then she had to wash the dishes. Her hand would feel like they were on fire. She ran about collecting papers, moving rocks out of the way that had been used to prop the wagon wheels. Joe swept furiously, and they were soon finished. Etta Shaw came to the front door